Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode number 73 of the Audible Farm Podcast. This week's episode is brought to you by the one, the only Couchtown Coffee. Couchtown Coffee is located right here in Iowa. It is roasted to your specifications and then shipped directly to your house. You can check it all out, www.couchtowncoffee.com, and find a coffee you like. The best part about it, you can save 20% by entering this week's code word just because you listen to the Audible Farm Podcast. So thanks, Couchtown. This week's code word is 3XW. 3XW is this week's code word. Oh man, save yourself 20%. www.couchtowncoffee.com. Why is this week's code word 3XW? Well, I'll tell you what. I'm sitting down with Todd Countryman. Todd Countryman, you might know him as he's the owner of 3XW. You might also know him as an in-ring persona at 3XW, as he has participated also in his own wrestling promotion. We sit down and talk about all sorts of things, how he got interested in wrestling, what got him started in this, first promoting shows to how it's changed over the years, all sorts of things. I've been to quite possibly hundreds of 3X shows over the years, and it's tons of fun. I really had a great time every single time I went to a 3X show. I highly suggest everybody check it out. Don't scare away from this one because we're talking pro wrestling. We try and break it down and make it, easy to digest for everybody listening. So I hope you guys all enjoy this one. I had a great time sitting down talking with Todd, and I bet you guys are going to love it too. So here we go, episode 73 with 3X wrestling owner Todd Countryman.
It's the Audible Farm Podcast with your host, Peter Stockdale.
All right, so today I'm sitting down with Todd Countryman, and Todd, you are a professional wrestling promoter. Would that be the correct term, or what term do you like to use?
That's technically what it is. I've promoted professional wrestling events since 2005, and then I also do, various other tasks or jobs within the company, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I first came to know who you were. I'd attended a whole bunch of 3X wrestling shows in the Des Moines area, and around Iowa. Actually, that was for a couple of years. You're just as aware as I am. For a couple of years there, I didn't miss a show. I'd go to every single show. But you've been doing this for how many years? How many years have you been involved with 3X? Is that like? Let me start at the beginning. Is that something you started?
Yeah, so our first event was in July 2005.
You're going to have to give me a second here. That was a
guy named David Anderson.
Your first event.
Oh, sure.
Your first event was when?
July 2005.
Oh, nice.
And I met a guy named David Anderson. I guess, I don't know, 6 or 8 months before that, maybe. He was putting on an autograph signing with Jerry the King Lawler. I got a flyer when I was coming out of a Monday Night Raw, and it was at a local mall. It was at Southridge Mall in Des Moines. And so I went to that autograph signing, and David had a website set up at the time. He was planning on starting an independent company. So I started talking to him through, he actually had a message board attached to the website. So if any of your listeners remember when message boards were a thing.
I was just thinking the same thing. That harkens back to an old time of the internet. But yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Earlier internet days.
Yeah. And before everything was just on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Before social media even existed, I guess.
Yeah.
So then I started talking to him, and him and I ended up meeting in person, a handful of times, watched some wrestling together. We got together for lunch. there was another guy that was talking to him at the same time, and that guy's name is Steve Bealey. And so 3 of us decided just to go all in together, and we started 3X Wrestling together. So we started planning kind of what we wanted to do, where we wanted to do it, and really started going to local-ish shows around Iowa. There weren't a ton at the time, so we would go to what we could or search on the internet about independent wrestlers in the Midwest, which also was kind of hard to find information on at the time as well. Chicago had a big wrestling message board, so that's actually how I found several guys like Egotistico, Fantastico, Robert Anthony,
Cool.
Another name he wrestles under, and Tony Scarpone, and some of those early people you saw on 3XW shows, Bryce Benjamin, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we started kind of created what we wanted to do for those first couple shows with Iowa and other Midwest talent. And we had our first event at Hoover High School in Des Moines. And of course, like most early stage wrestling promoters do, overbooked it, had 9 matches, went way too long.
Yeah. I mean, that's just one of those things, though. I bet, like, as a promoter, you always probably run a little bit of an internal battle as far as if you're going to book a show. I mean, it's probably not different than any of the people that listen to music that do this. They want to promote a show. I mean, it's awesome when you stack 6 bands on a show, but who wants to stand and watch 6 bands in a row? And etc. I get the gist. If you put too much wrestling on a show is not always a good thing.
Right. Yeah. It's the crowd gets tired. The reactions aren't as good. People, start to filter out a little bit. Often it'll be families. We'll leave earlier. So.
Yeah, I think the toughest part about that would probably have to be, for whoever's main eventing the show is probably, it's usually the biggest match of the night, and that's usually the one that gets, that sees most of the effects of a card going too long.
100%, yeah. Yeah, you never want the main event to have half empty chairs.
Yeah, that'd definitely be a no-go. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of parallels between like what you're doing and what some people promoting music are doing. But what year was this when you had your first show at Hoover?
It was July 23rd, 2005. The date is ingrained in my brain. So it was, I was in a much different place in life. I had not met my wife yet. I had no children. I lived still in my hometown. So, it was a much different world for me then. And we had Billy Gunn booked coming in. It was just a few months after he was released from WWE. So at the time, it was a pretty big deal. We were very excited to have him. And he did a great job. He's a giant man. He was much larger than I was anticipating.
Yeah.
So I was taken aback when I met him in person.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that you had said that like you'd signed Billy Gunn not too much longer after he got released from WWE, and that was when I first started going to wrestling shows. I mean, this is going to sound so ludicrous. I went like completely oblivious to the fact that more than on an occasion you would rub shoulders with somebody that was on TV that was slightly famous. Sometimes you'd run into guys and you'd be like, this guy's a little bit shorter than I imagined, but he's still just so jacked he could destroy me. But Billy Gunn's not that way. Billy Gunn is, there's a picture of me somewhere on the internet with Billy Gunn, and I'm barely over his shoulders. Like, yeah, it's wild.
Shockingly large man.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing about, you watch WWE on TV and you see all those wrestlers and everybody's relatively-ish the same size. They're just about, back in the day when you and I were watching, everyone was like 6 foot-ish or taller and, and like 300-ish pounds or so.
Right.
Nowadays, it's not like that, I mean, you would know more than anybody would, I bet. But
Oh, for sure. And you would see some guy on, you know, WWE or WWF TV back then, and you'd think, well, that guy's actually a little bit smaller. And then you would meet that person in person, and you'd be like, nope, that's still a huge human.
yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the fun ones is to think of the small guys, and then you go stand next to him, and like you think, oh, X-Pac's tiny, and then you stand next to him, and it's like, oh, he's a regular-sized human. Like he's bigger than me still. Like it's wild to think about that kind of stuff. You know,
tiny for 90s wrestling, but now he would be one of the bigger guys on a show.
Yeah, yeah. I bet that's okay. So let me ask you this: you've been booking shows for long enough. I mean, if I had to do the math in my head, it's 15 years now.
Yeah.
So like you've probably seen some sort of like I don't want to say fads come and go, but the wrestling scene as like a culture has definitely changed over time. As we've aforementioned, like over 30 years or so, it used to be big burly guys that couldn't do much as far as aerial stuff, and now it seems to be a lot of guys that are very tactical and proficient and aerial dynamic. You know, the people that can do sorts of the flippy flops and all that good stuff. But what are some of the things you've noticed as far as just promoting?
Yeah, there's been a lot of changes. You know, the early days of me being involved, you know, there was a lot more emphasis, as far as the promoting end on, getting flyers out, physical flyers out, trying to get actual television commercials on air, possibly radio. Social media really wasn't a thing yet.
I gotta stop you for just a second and say I saw one of your TV commercials when I was like a senior-ish in high school, and I was in Des Moines at somebody's house watching TV.
Oh, nice.
That would have been like 2006 or 7. I would have been, right around when I graduated. I remember seeing it. So like, dude, I remember seeing your TV commercials. So they did exist, and I remember them. So they were effective.
Awesome. Yeah, that was another thing that was, a little more difficult at the time too, actually getting a commercial made, because, not everyone had a supercomputer in their pocket, the smartphone didn't exist. So just finding someone with a computer that had software with editing capabilities on video, because those files, they're still massive, but at the time, computers just didn't have as much, storage memory power. So, even getting that stuff, produced, or someone with a decent video camera for shows.
Dude, okay. So this is no different than a musician trying to find somewhere where they can record stuff. Because, I mean, like back in the day, it was nearly impossible. There was no way to do it. And now, like you said, you can damn near record an album on a phone and get away with it. It's pretty wild. I mean, nobody would ever do that, but...
right.
It's still a thing. You could do it in your bedroom, and it's perfectly fine and understandable.
Yeah, and you can record 1080p video on your phone now. So,
yeah.
At the time, we were using high 8 tapes, so it was very different. And we would, get those edited to make a commercial. You'd have to get all the right connectors, connect to the computer, and we started to produce DVDs pretty early on too, which is totally not a thing anymore either. I mean, people still make them, but there was a good chunk of time where we were selling a lot of DVDs, both on the internet and at shows, and it would pay for a good chunk of everyone booked just off of DVD sales. So I definitely miss those days. That was a nice little bonus, but everything's going to streaming now, so that's a huge difference in comparison to then. And so the style of wrestling has changed also. We had, 2005 people were still, it was actually kind of a lower period, I would say, for wrestling on TV, because, a lot of the other companies had been bought out or closed, gone away.
Yeah, the general landscape was Vince McMahon pretty much just bought everyone out and dominated everyone, and then you were left with there was no competition.
No competition and no differences in style. So the disenfranchised fans of, the other companies or styles, kind of were still like, why doesn't my stuff still exist? And they just weren't watching wrestling anymore. So we got a lot of people that would come up and tell me, I'm not watching on TV, but I love this. It reminds me of what I used to watch, because, it's kind of more of I would call it an older school style. We tried to present characters and a lot of storyline promos and stuff so people would understand what was going on the shows.
Mm-hmm.
So now in comparison to today, the style is what's really seems to be selling to people as far as, buying tickets, and they want to watch stuff, via live feeds on the internet, is a lot of, high spots, acrobatics, hard hitting. It's kind of a mishmash of styles. I would say there's a lot less storytelling in the ring, which I know will probably piss off some wrestlers if they ever hear this, but that's fine.
No, man, I totally get it. I think one of the things that drew me into wrestling initially was, and this is going to sound weird, like I grew up and I knew Hulk Hogan existed. I knew that was all a thing, but I never had cable growing up. I never had the ability to watch any pro wrestling of any sort.
Right.
On Sundays or Saturdays, I would occasionally catch, it was WWF at the time, had Sunday Morning Superstars. And there was Saturday show was called like Live Wire or something, and it was their like little compilation show where they told like this is what happened during the week. And I mean, they would use any sort of like video capabilities they had, and they would cut everything down and take all the best parts of the matches and re-commentate everything and show you all the best spots. And then that would, they were like, oh, this storyline would have all these vignettes and promos leading up to it, and then they would show you the highlights of what was going on, leading you into a pay-per-view and things like that. So I was always very intrigued by the I don't want to say character driven, but just having some sort of a storyline to lean on a little bit. Maybe even going from week to week, it was, or, in indie showcases, like a month to month usually. But I always felt that having that kind of storyline to lean on was a little bit better, as far as just being easier to digest than just seeing like a physical display of athleticism, which is not something I don't like, because I mean, growing up, my favorite wrestler was probably Shawn Michaels. I mean, as most people close to my age, that would probably be a popular one for most people, because he was the guy that did, some of the higher flying stuff in WWF at the time. So
Right.
But I totally get what you're saying. The style has totally changed. Right now, from what I guess, I don't watch nearly as much wrestling as I used to, but it's a lot of, like you said, it's a lot of high spots, which to people that are listening that don't know what high spots are, it's like, a big flip or something that's going to take a lot of the awe of the crowd away from anything else that's going on. It's something that, makes everybody stand up and go, whoa, those are the high spots, jumping through the ropes and things like that. But other than that, it's like,
it's funny. You just said something that they always forget about.
What's that?
You just said something that I always forget about when I'm talking about wrestling, is this whole other lingo that we have
Yeah.
And I'm just throwing out words that people may not even understand.
No, it's totally cool, because I mean, I use them when I'm talking to people as well. Sometimes I will use like heel and face. I will use those and things like that. But the lingo is something I've always been intrigued by, and it used to be something back in the day. It was something that was more kept hush hush, and nowadays it's something that's bantered about a little bit more on the internet and elsewhere. But I've even heard people use kayfabe, in public. So it's kind of one of those weird things where you start to see your guys' lingo kind of come out a little bit.
Starting to spread, like a filthy disease.
Dude, and that was another one of the things that I would have to say, like, drew me initially to wrestling shows, where like I would go to your shows, and as far as like storyline, the first show I went to was probably the best show you could go to, and it was the King of Des Moines tournament. And
Okay.
so it was the one night tournament. You brought in a bunch of wrestlers, and they all had a one night tournament to see who could be the king of Des Moines. And it was nice because that took up the majority of the show. There wasn't much
Right.
room for anything else. So there was no storyline really being pushed by anything. All you had really was the tournament to lean on. So I went into this thing dry, just watching wrestlers wrestle, and you got tiny bits of storyline sprinkled in and out here. Like, this guy's got a manager, and the manager's kind of mean or whatever, and like, why is
Right.
this manager, okay, this guy's definitely a bad guy, and then so the next month you have something to go in on, because it's like, well, this guy was bad last month, he's probably gonna be bad this month or whatever.
Right. That's something that there's a guy that wrestled with us from the very start, and I try to pick up knowledge from anybody that I can as I've gone through this, and so he wrestled as Gage Octane, and something he told me pretty early on was, typically you're going to have some regulars that come back, show after show, and you do want to do stuff to, keep them interested in coming back, but he told me you should always count on a good chunk of your crowd coming in knowing nothing about your show, knowing nothing about the wrestlers or their characters. So the simpler you can keep it, the easier it is to understand. So then they're not, stuck thinking, what is going on in this convoluted storyline, which I know I've strayed from simple at times, but he's 100% right, because if you can keep a continuous story and still try to keep it somewhat simple and explainable to someone coming in fresh, then you've got a new fan, because, if they can understand what's going on and they can get into it right away, then they can get excited about it and they can understand, okay, this guy's evil, this guy's out to do this, he wants that belt, whatever, that sort of thing. So that has always helped me, listening to the guys on the roster, also just taking their tidbits of what works. Of course, with everything, and I'm sure music is somewhat similar, a lot of people are out for themselves too, so you kind of got to know who to trust and who to listen to.
Yeah. And I like that Gage Octane came up in this conversation. He was one of the first people I remember watching wrestle. And he had wrestled with you for quite a while at that time, long enough that the regular people at the shows knew who he was.
Right.
And even though he was a bad guy, he still had some fans that were just such a fan of his work that they tried to cheer for him anyways, and usually they got overshadowed by all the people booing him. But it was he was one of those guys that would do the simplest things to make people mad, didn't go over the top and go crazy, and so that just goes to show, it doesn't always take something over the top and ludicrous to make people not like you, as far as coming out there and being a wrestler. I always thought that would probably be the most difficult thing in wrestling, would be to go from being a bad, to being let's go from heel to babyface. So you're a bad guy to a good guy. The fans don't like you to now they like you.
Oh, right.
There is I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but there is like a performance aspect to this in some sense, that but I don't know. I always just figured that would probably be the most difficult thing to do. What do you?
Yeah, I agree. I think the general consensus is, with a lot of the guys, they generally enjoy being a heel more, I think, for the most part. And a lot of them find being babyface or good guy much more difficult, because, going out there and trying to get people to cheer for you while also not being able to do certain things. You have to really, as a good babyface, you have to uphold the rules at all times. You have to be smiling. You have to, basically, like you're running for president, you're kissing babies, high-fiving everybody. And to get people behind you to support you, to actually clap their hands or yell in support of you, can be a super difficult thing, especially if for whatever reason the crowd that night is all new, or they're used to booing you for the last 2 years, and now suddenly they have to support you, or you want them to support you. It is hard. And to be a heel, for me anyway, as during the shows, playing a heel manager character for a good chunk of when we've done shows, it's so much fun. It's a great release, getting to yell at someone, or just get on the microphone and just be a complete asshole. It's a lot of fun. You can, to a degree, say whatever you want, and then just claim that you're playing a character. And it's to go from that to being, you don't have to be goody two shoes, I guess, but in a sense you do. So yeah, I think that is super hard. And I think that's when you see the really talented people, shine, and you really see what skills they have, because if they can make that transition, they can do anything probably.
Yeah, definitely. I remember you had mentioned you were a manager, and I remember when I first started watching wrestling at 3X shows down in Des Moines, you were managing a group called Genesis. And if I recall correctly, the whole gist with it was Genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your whole deal was that was most of the guys that had been in the company since somewhere around when it started were in Genesis. Am I getting this correctly?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had been managing previous to that, Gage Octane and Mark Sterling. They were called the Gentlemen's Club.
Oh yeah.
And we were kind of causing havoc, and what ended up happening was we turned on Sterling at some point, and I brought in Casanova and Devin Carter to the Gentlemen's Club. And so then slowly that evolved into the larger Genesis group. Yeah, and the whole gist of it really was, it was kind of a reset of the company, I guess you could say. A way to create new storylines and new interests. And then it was also an opportunity for me to bring back some guys on the roster that had been missing for a while.
Yeah.
And so that, they might not have been there for a year or 2 or 3 maybe. And so it was a good opportunity. I think at that time is when, like, I know Matty Starr, Tony Sly, Ben Saylor, Nate Bash, all those guys were mixed into Genesis at one point. It became a little ridiculous, because I think it ended up being like the original NWO, where we had like 12 members, but it was a lot of fun. And I think fondly of all of those guys, because they were there at the beginning. So I've got good memories of all those guys helping us from the very start, and traveling around to different shows we did in different towns, and to get to be a heel manager with a lot of them was very, very fun.
Yeah, heck, I can only imagine. I always wanted to do something involved with pro wrestling, but I always, every time I was around it always seemed a little too, I don't want to say intimidating, but it was more involved than I, just generally wanted to be. It's not just a weekend gig, a lot of these guys
right.
are, busting their ass during the week to get in some sort of physical condition to be able to wrestle, and not only that, but, even as rudimentary as it might seem, and you watch it on TV and you're like, well, anybody can do that, but then I'd like to just go see it live once and then just be like, I wouldn't want to do that. And then, especially to like get in a car or get on an airplane and fly in or drive in, and then to do this, fly out or drive out, or, none of it's a lot of work. There's a lot of things involved with that. Like you said, going to and from shows with a lot of those guys that were, with you in Genesis, or you'd have a road show and you'd go somewhere else, some other town all around Iowa. I mean, I remember seeing you do other work for other companies here and there. I mean, even down in like Kansas City and stuff like that. I'm sure you're no stranger to going to shows in other towns, places
right.
places like Chicago and Minneapolis and Omaha. Quad Cities area. There's wrestling all over the place, but I mean, that is one of the things that I think a lot of people don't seem to think too much about, is how much traveling is actually involved, even with you guys on like a semi-local level.
Yeah, it's a crazy amount of time to invest, for someone that wants to get involved and, actually take it, I guess, somewhat seriously, where you want to, go to the degree of, trying to get better and work for a bunch of different companies. And I started to referee. I just did it on a handful of our shows, like in 2006, and then would kind of do it sporadically. And then there was a company in like Kansas, Missouri area called Central States Wrestling.
Oh yeah.
And there's some guys on our roster that, worked there: Jeremy Wyatt, Mark Sterling, Derek Stone, Craig Kieseman, all those guys. And so they kind of put in the word for me, and I started to referee there. And eventually they stopped running shows. Metro Pro opened, running basically the same type of areas, but in Missouri and Kansas a little bit. Mm-hmm. And some of those same guys were working for Metro Pro, and so I started referee from Metro Pro from the beginning. And it's a huge time investment. So those shows would be, once a month, or typically for Metro Pro. And then Chris from Metro Pro was involved with NWL in Kansas City. So I got to have the opportunity to start working there, and it was every other Saturday. So, of course, this is all many years later. NWL was just 2 or 3 years ago. But, that is a huge time commitment, traveling down to Kansas City every other Saturday in itself. Oh, yeah. In addition to promoting our shows and whatever else I had going on. I also started to referee for the Wrestling Revolver during that time frame also.
Oh, wow.
Because I apparently didn't think I was busy enough. And but it was awesome. The bonds that you make with guys as you travel, and I'm sure it's the same in music. It's really cool because who else are you spending hours upon hours in a car with, doing ridiculous things, seeing things, out in the world that you would never see at these weird gas stop restaurants, random places that you stop. So it makes for an interesting life. And I guess as I've gotten older, I've tried to cut back on that a little bit now that I've got kids. So I ended up kind of pulling back on referee duties, and then probably just doing promoting right now, I guess. But the whole thing with the time, these guys that wrestle, I don't think people realize that on our shows, not all these guys live in Des Moines. It's not like they're going out for, their weekend softball league. These guys are traveling from Minnesota, Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas, Illinois. Other guys might be coming from either in further away, maybe Texas or, far north Michigan, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've had talent fly in from all over the country. That's what a lot of workers they're always surprised that these guys are coming from, all these various spots. And that these guys do this, 2, 3, 4 days a week when possible. And, some of them are doing it full time as an actual job. And I think it just blows their mind that that's actually a thing.
Yeah.
So, and that's something as a promoter I've always tried to do too, is I don't want to have, a roster of just, and no offense to anyone that does this, but I don't want to have a roster of just guys that live in Iowa. I love Iowa. I love guys that live in Iowa and wrestle. But I don't want just that. I want different flavors coming in. I want different talent that people don't see on every single show in Iowa. So I like to mix it up with people from all over and try to get a different mix, because it creates different matchups, more exciting stuff, and they're seeing different talent. So it gives fans an opportunity to see something new and different. So yeah, it's something unique that the average person that's not a fan doesn't realize, I don't think.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that was one of the things I realized when I started going to your shows. I kind of, surveyed the lay of the land. I started to figure out that some of these guys actually traveled here from other places. And then I started to figure out that, some of the people were local, but at the same rate, you had Genesis there, and they were kind of this like giant group of people that nobody could permeate. Nobody could take the titles from you guys. Nobody could defeat anybody because there was always just too many of you. And you would bring in different wrestlers from different areas every now and then to come in and test their luck against them and stuff like that. And sometimes the guys would, start a beef with somebody, and they'd stick around for a few months and wrestle for a while. And, that was one of the times I started to realize, like, man, there are a lot of wrestlers out there. And I started looking a little bit, deeper into it. And I mean, I'm sure that I spent a little bit of time doing the indie power rankings with some other guys from across the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. And, there was a guy from, Africa in there, and there was a guy from the Middle East in there as well. I mean, there was people from the UK, all over the place, Canada. It was pretty wild. But I got to see, like, you'd get to see the perspective that other people had from their region. And, I'd see, oh, this guy wrestled these matches, and then you'd go look up the results from other companies. And you'd be like, oh, he wrestled twice this weekend. That's pretty cool. And then you'd go look at somewhere else, and, oh, this guy wrestled 3 times this weekend. That's pretty wild. And I mean, occasionally you'd run across somebody that it's like, this guy wrestled 6 times in a week. How did he even pull that off? Is that even possible? But I mean, I do recall seeing a couple times, even in the Midwest, where people would wrestle twice in an evening, which was super rare because it you'd have to plan it out to have 2 matches on the same night. 2 companies running competing shows within driving distance. But
and then try to get the promoters to agree to let you do that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a special circumstance, but it does happen, and that's the passion some of these guys have for it. I mean, and that was not lost on me because every show that I had to go watch a wrestling show. Like, I mean, Algona was close by. I could go see the IPW, the company up there. But like, I mean, every time I came down to Des Moines, it was a 2-hour one-way drive, and I'd be there every single month watching wrestling. Because you were at the Forte Center there for a while, just packing that place to the brim. It was absolute insanity at that place. I mean,
those were good days.
Yeah, and I mean, that was where, like, when I was talking, I mean, you'd start bringing in guys from like St. Louis and even farther away. I think I remember guys coming from farther south than that, and it was Kansas City and Minneapolis and the Omaha area. It seemed like you really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there were more wrestlers out there than just some Iowa guys that were out there, and it helped me along with what I had at the time was just like a ludicrous runaway hobby of going to all these wrestling shows.
Oh yeah.
That was. What do you think? Here's actually one. Did you ever get any training to do any sort of like refereeing work, or was that something that you figured out on the fly from some sort of introspection from people that had already been trained?
Yeah, little A and little B on that. I started to do. So we had some initial training classes in the early years. That were led by a guy that wrestled as Brian Ash.
Oh, yeah. And, I was trying to remember his name, and I couldn't remember it. Brian Ash.
Large guy.
Yes.
Shaved head, intimidating looking fellow.
Very intimidating.
So he was training some guys. Like we had those early classes that included like Jimmy Rockwell, Zach Thompson, Ricky Kwong, Aaron Masterson, Mad Dog was in there too.
Mm-hmm.
But so I would go to a lot of these training sessions early on just to watch, and because to me it was fascinating. I had never been involved in anything like that previously. Mm-hmm. And so then Brian was working with us on promoting a show or two down in the Ottumwa area. And so he was planning to put in Battle Royal. So then, he asked Steve Bealey and I if we wanted to jump in. I was like, yes, I'm insane. I want to. So we started doing a little in-ring training, just, basic bumps, running the ropes, just like anybody else starting out. And Also getting tossed over and through the ropes, all that fun stuff, and ripped my leg open on the top rope first time I went over.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
So
That's
little
that.
blood never hurt anybody, right?
Yeah, that's also something that like it happens a lot in wrestling. Somebody gets tossed over the top rope,
Yeah.
but it's always been something that's just like that's not as easy as it looks.
No, it's not. Definitely takes some technique.
I would almost venture to say it might even be easier to go over the top than through the ropes.
It is. I would agree with that. To go through, I think, is more difficult. You gotta, kind of place your limbs perfectly going through.
Yes.
Over the top. Still takes some skill. And actually, Brian, the guy I was talking about there, he trained with Harley Race.
Whoa.
And so when he would do his over the top, a lot of times he would do the Harley backwards over the top to the floor, which I was like, wow, to me, that's insane.
That's crazy.
He always did it, and he did it very well. But to get back to your question, so I did that sort of training, and then the first time I refereed, it was really, we needed a referee. And so I just jumped in there. I happened to have a couple referee shirts that my dad had found at an auction a while before that, in case I ever needed them. And so then I used that shirt that night. And then some of the guys, Craig Kieseman actually, he helped me a lot with the referee skills because when he first started out, he learned how to do that. And so he taught me, exactly, kind of what to do and what not to do. And then, of course, with anything in wrestling, you learn a lot more as you go through it. So, of course, the more matches you're involved in different situations, you learn. So a little bit of wrestler type training and then learning from guys as I went. And it's a hell of a lot of fun. I will say that. Refereeing is the best seat in the house you can have for any match. And I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of very cool local guys that I know personally, and then also a lot of guys that I've watched on TV, like Hacksaw and John Morrison as a more recent guy. Yeah. So, and the thing about, working with guys from all over, for the most part, 90% of them are super cool. You do run into some guys that aren't. Maybe they're having a bad day, whatever. And I'm sure it's the same way, like in your line, of music too. Most people are probably super cool. So
yeah. And I mean, I love that about pro wrestling. Like I used to go to shows and think like, man, these guys don't want to hear anything I have to say. But at the same rate, you'd go talk to some of them and it's like, these guys are just as down to earth as anybody else. They're real human beings, just like everybody, And then, there's, like you said, there's some guys that don't want to talk to you. They don't want to have anything to do with you. But at the same rate, that could just be, it's, people are just built different. I don't always want to talk with people when I'm at shows. I'm just I am a little bit antisocial at shows. I just don't, I don't talk too much. I don't know what to say when people are like, great job. And you're just like, yeah, okay. I don't know what to do. What do I do? What do I do with my hands right now? I'm one of those kind of people, and maybe that's maybe some wrestlers are no different. They don't want to talk to people. They went out there and did their thing, and that's what they got. That's why they came here, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. So I never held it too much against people when they weren't nice, but like you said, I couldn't believe even dudes that were on TV wrestling for many years. You'd run into them and just be like, "This guy is the nicest guy in the world."
Yeah. It's almost shocking.
Yeah, I'd like to point at like Hacksaw would be the easiest one to point at because he's come and gone through Iowa a lot.
Yes,
I mean, I think he likes it here. It's one of those deals. I didn't spend like a whole lot of time like hanging out with him, but I did spend some time with him here and there when he was in Iowa, and super nice guy. I mean, he always had good things to say.
The nicest guy. Loves to hang out with the boys, and he has no aura of being too good for anyone. Like he will sit there and have a beverage and hang out all night long.
Yeah.
He's the coolest guy.
Yeah, I mean, he'd be probably one of the people I remember talking to that was just like, this guy's super nice. But Larry Hennig would be another one. That'd be Mr. Perfect's father.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I sat and talked with him at a show and didn't even realize it was him. And I
Oh,
mean,
awesome.
and I sat and talked with him for like 15 minutes, and we were just talking about wrestling, and it's like, oh yeah, like weather's pretty crazy. Yeah, okay, blah blah, this, that, and the other. We're just talking. And then I think I've told this story before, but somebody was like, "What are you doing talking to Larry Hennig?" I'm like, "What? Oh, I didn't even realize that was him. I didn't even cross my mind that there's a famous person here." But
Right.
I mean, that's the other thing. Like, you could go to shows, and sometimes people that have been on TV will be in the crowd at shows. Like
Right.
Evan, I remember Evan Bourne going to shows.
Yeah.
3X shows. I've seen him at shows before. I think there's even a picture of me on Facebook lurking around with him.
Oh yeah.
At a show. So
Yeah, he came to just watch his brother, and he hung out. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's probably one of my favorite things about wrestling shows is you just never know who's going to be there, and there's an oddly larger sense of community involved with the local wrestling shows than I ever imagined there would be. I mean, from online involvement to going to the shows to hanging out to I mean, I became Facebook friends and Twitter followers, etc., with so many people that I never imagined I ever would be. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's like its own kind of unique community, I guess, because you've got wrestlers, promoters, fans, referees, ring announcers, what have you, everyone involved, and they kind of, they all interact with each other at shows, and then, of course, you see it on social media. They just give each other a hard time and joke around, and a lot of them get together outside of shows, and it's pretty cool to see, people, become friends or almost like a second family. And I've thought about this before, is like, since I've started this, seeing people come and go over the years, and I've seen, it's like several couples that have met through wrestling that, are now maybe having kids or buying a house. And I'm like, not to say that I'm the reason, but I'm like, it's kind of cool to think, I don't know if they would have ever met if I hadn't started this little wrestling company with David and Steve.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see that sort of thing happen over the course of, 15 years, and what I would call different generations of wrestlers come into the business, and other ones sort of step away or quote unquote retire, if that's actually a thing in wrestling.
Yeah, the whole I'm going to retire. No, I'm not gonna. Here's my comeback match, my third comeback, and
Yeah.
it's no different.
Coming back, and
It's no different
1
than
year later.
no different than Kiss,
Right. Our final tour.
Yes, exactly. You're talking about like having different almost generations of wrestlers. You have like this group of guys, and now you've got a fresh batch of guys. I mean, even if I went to a show, there's only a handful of the guys that I watched wrestle almost 10 years ago that still wrestle on the regular. I mean, there's obviously some of them still do, just not for your company particularly.
Right.
But is that something you run into, is like an issue with longevity with like people that are wrestling? My way of making an example of that was like, imagine you're a music promoter and you've got a handful of bands that have a lot of longevity. They've always been a band. It's the same guys. They all like each other. But then you have some bands that are like, these bands haul ass, but sometimes they have differences and can't make shows because of
Right.
lineup changes or something. So that'd be like my way to liken it to something that I run into. But do you ever run into anything like that with wrestlers?
I would say like there's certain instances where maybe a guy, we had several guys that had been with us from the very start, and then kind of as they got older and either started a family, or maybe they just had too many injuries, where they were hurting a lot, or they were getting married, whatever. I decided to step away either at the time and came back later, or stayed out. And so those situations, like a lot of those guys that were there from the beginning, when they decided to kind of step away, those ones really were the ones that I felt sad about, almost like I'm like kind of like, you're losing that person that you're going to see, kind of consistently at every show, like a Devin Carter or Gage Octane, Brian Ash, Jimmy Rockwell, those guys, those friendships that you've built over the years. I have to say Tony Sly, because he'll probably listen to this, so I'm gonna throw his name in there too. And then you have other guys that, like you said, that like maybe they show up late, or they're not as reliable, or even though they're really good at what they do, in those type of situations, usually I try to nip those in the bud pretty early on. When it starts happening or whatever, I'll just stop booking them. I don't wait for them to walk away. I'll just kind of clean it up on my own. And I've tried to, over the years, always have a roster / locker room of people, 1, that I liked, 2, that were reliable, and 3, good in what they do. I don't want any, assholes in the locker room that are either, maybe they're super nice to me because honestly, they want to be booked, so they're all nice to me. So, but everybody talks, so I'll hear stories, or if I hear of other situations going on, whether it's something, shady, outside the ring, whatever, I don't want any of that around. I don't want any, bad mojo. I don't want any bad press coming at us. I don't want any thing out there that could potentially, happen badly for any of our fans either. So I want to protect our locker room, all the people that attend our shows. I want a good environment for everybody to work in, so that's why I hate like the good people that decide to walk away. That is awesome for them, but it sucks for our shows because it's great to have consistently good people around.
Yeah. And that was actually something I don't want to, derail the conversation here that we had, but I was actually thinking to myself the other day how difficult. Okay. So imagine you have a job wherever you're at, and your boss, right? And your boss, if you work for like a small business, he owns the place and runs the place, and he's got his job is to make sure the machine is well oiled and everything's working. And that's not an easy job. I don't care what your job is and how, whatever your politics are at work, your boss's job is not easy. And at this job, you're the boss, and this is not like a regular job that people have, So I always thought that creating the right environment in a situation like that would be very difficult. Is it really, what do you think? Is it really that much different than a regular job? Or do you think it's a lot the same?
It is. I think very different because, and you might run into some of this at a regular, office or, factory, but in wrestling in particular, I think it's unique because of the entertainment aspect. And even though we're independent wrestling and we're not necessarily, on TV every week, the egos involved make it different because everybody, for the most part, always wants to have, their character at the top spot, or meaning, and I'm using wrestling lingo again, meaning, to be the champion or to be in a featured position. And just the way the shows ebb and flow, that person, not everyone can be there. So, you have to have guys kind of move up and down the card to keep things interesting and be able to generate new stories and new feuds and different matchups. So in that aspect, that makes wrestling unique because you're dealing with the egos of, grown men. And I've often made the equivalent that it's like babysitting adults, if that makes sense, because you do feel like sometimes when they're coming to you, just complaining about things that maybe, okay, if this were a regular 9 to 5. I would not have someone whining to me about this particular thing. But, for the most part, people are super cool, and I don't want to make it sound like everybody is a whiny child involved in wrestling, because that's not the case at all.
No. But that's
just
one of
an
those
easy way to explain it.
Yeah, but that's one of those situations, like I was saying, if your boss's job is not easy, think about how many times any of the listeners that are listening, like how many times have you gone to your boss with like a concern you have with your workplace, and
Right.
how valid is the concern always? Because sometimes, like I know I've done it where I've like went up to my boss and like, here's a thing, and they're like, okay, and then it irons itself out and goes away, and
Right.
it was never something like I didn't even really have to bring it up. It was more or less like time wasting than anything. But
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some of that is like the equivalent of kind of what you're talking to, where someone. I'll just bring up something dumb like, oh, I don't have wrist tape, or this guy took all my wrist tape. Just something stupid like
sure.
that.
Yeah.
Whatever it happens to be. Not to throw the wrist tape joke out there. That's,
Right.
That's a rough one. But look it up, people. No.
Hey, that weekend worked out well for me, thankfully.
Yeah.
We were the first show of the weekend, so.
Yeah. That was so rough. And that was one of those other things where you start to realize that there's this is a weird thing. So like there was an event that happened that involved this inside joke that we're talking about, wrist tape, where long story short, one company ended up on the short end of a stick when it involved hiring a talent. And that was one of those things where like the whole entire wrestling community around, like en masse, came together to attempt to rectify the situation the best they could.
Yeah, that was what was kind of really cool about that whole thing is as that weekend progressed, and there was it was basically what we would call a triple shot in wrestling, a Friday show, a Saturday show, and a Sunday show, with 3 different companies booking these same folks. Friday show went off without a hitch. There was an incident on the Saturday show where one guy seemingly looked like he was purposely trying to hurt a guy. And then an incident on the Sunday show where the gist of the whole thing is basically they were holding up the promoter for more money almost, and said that they left their wrist tape in the car and just left the show and abandoned the promoter and everything they had agreed to do. So, but to see the community of independent wrestling in the Midwest, and I think across the country really at the time, because the internet had kind of grown at that point, really support, the promoters that kind of got the shaft, and everybody really came together, fans and, people in wrestling, and supported the companies that, did not have a good experience, and really rallied against the guys that, did the shenanigans.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the cool thing about wrestling too, is the people involved, both wrestlers and fans, they're very, very outspoken and loyal. So
yes,
you never really have to worry about someone not having your back if the situation is a terrible one like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the other thing you don't ever have to worry about is, getting an honest opinion out of somebody. You just get on Twitter afterwards and check the hashtags,
Yeah, because people definitely will say things on the internet that they will never say to you in person. So
yeah, that'll definitely happen. I mean,
it's like talking to someone that's been, drinking and they're 4 or 5 drinks in. You're going to get the real story on the internet.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and that was another thing, was like I remember going to shows and realizing that there was like a Twitter community of indie wrestling that like you could get on and tweet about the shows and things like that, and other people would interact with you, and then after a while you're like, oh shit, this guy's at the shows every week. He's sitting right over there, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go say hi to him, and you go talk to some of these people, and that was one of those cool things where you could even in your off time have some banter about something with somebody on Twitter that nobody else but you and your buddies know about, and it's like, oh, Gage Octane's totally gonna destroy Casanova this weekend, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? But like you and me and everybody that's following us that's involved with this little wrestling thing knows what's up, and
right.
Those were some of the funnest things I remember doing, on as far as like wrestling. has during the downtime, because you would run shows usually about once a month. You know, in the warmer seasons, you might run twice a month, 3 times a month. Fair season gets a little busy
Right.
sometimes, but you know, it's one of those things. I'd go to all these shows, and there's downtime between the shows, but you'd still get some interaction, and occasionally even the wrestlers themselves would hop on their Twitter accounts and create some interaction between them and their fan base, or them and their upcoming opponent. You know, and that was one of those fun things you get to see those guys.
I tried to push those guys really early on. I guess I kind of claim to be an early advocate of social media, which now in 2020 might have been a mistake. I should have just said kill the whole thing, but the first one that was widely popular is MySpace, so I tried to get every single wrestler to open a MySpace page in their character name, so that we could, post pictures and mention their page, and we had a 3XW page, and we would, promote events on there and try to get all the guys to promote events. So that was really my goal, was to get everyone to promote the show via their following on MySpace. And then I think I don't know if this is actually true, but I think I was one of the first Iowa wrestling people on Facebook, and started to push on there as much as possible, and then Twitter was after that, and Instagram, etc. So really trying to get all those guys out there and involved. And also, like you just said, I think it really helps when they do interact, with people that are attending the shows, because it gets them more interested. And we used to try to do a lot of videos on YouTube, which were really based on kind of promoting their character, or developing their character, I guess you could say, to try to get their personality to shine there outside of shows, so that you could do a little more showcasing of those people, which helped when we were training those early classes, like I mentioned earlier, of Zach Thompson, Jimmy Rockwell. And, because they were, all the guys that were training for the most part were fairly local, so we could get a camera in front of them and do promos or little vignettes to try to promote whatever their character was and whatever matches they might have upcoming. So
yeah, I remember your YouTube channel used to be pretty busy with like little backstage promos and things like that, or upcoming this week and things like that would be going on. I also remember your guys' Facebook presence was absolutely massive. I mean, it's well polished. Everything was like all the images were nice. Everything was done up pretty good. It was, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, so like, for example, people would come in and wrestle on your show, and sometimes they would wrestle and they wouldn't have like a Facebook page or anything like that at all for anything. So you would just create one for them, for your company. So it's like, I mean, I'm just, I'll just make like Gauge Octane. Let's just say there's no Gauge Octane Facebook page, but there might even still be a Gauge Octane 3XW Facebook page that had all of the Gauge Octane 3XW stuff.
Yeah, I really forced it down everyone's throat as much as possible, that was, at least wrestling for us on a regular basis. And probably some that were just occasionally wrestling for us. I really pushed it, trying to get every single person to do. And so basically what I would do is I would pitch it to them, set it up, add them as administrator on the page also, so they had access to posts if they wanted to as well. And kind of what I discovered is a lot of the guys that wrestled other places really never posted for any of their other shows.
Yeah.
It was just me posting 3XW stuff, which was totally fine by me. I was totally fine only promoting our stuff. But if they wanted to use it as a tool to promote their other, matches or appearances other places, I was more than okay with it too. But so, yeah, I probably at one point in time had created at least 25 pages for guys, just to try to further, their fan base, and also at the same time give a little rub ski to 3XW.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's one of those things I've often thought, even, in the music community, I felt like it'd be one of those things as far as having like that web presence. Some bands just simply don't have it, and I didn't know any way I wanted to help out any way I could, and that was actually like how I started Audible Farm. Was I started recording bands live, and then with their permission, I would upload the live videos to you know my YouTube channel, and then people could see them. And some bands use that as a way to send it out to other promoters and be like, "Hey, check it out! I can play music," or you send it to a venue and be like, "Hey, can I book a show here?" Yeah, send me some material. And it's like, I don't have any, but I got this live video. And they're like, "Well, this audio actually sounds pretty good. Come on in."
Right.
And so if I think there is a little bit of a parallel between what you were doing and what I'm kind of doing right now. And I think it's definitely a help if you have that little extra push, but it's also it's tough to get people to jump on the bandwagon that you're on. I'm
Right.
sure you're no spring chicken to that one there.
Oh, for sure. And the technology is, you know, I don't know the percentage, but the great majority of people I know have a smartphone. So you've got it right there at your fingertips and you carry it everywhere. Why not use it? So anyone that's not, promoting themselves, that's in some sort of field of entertainment, that blows my mind.
Yeah.
But I definitely, I'll have wrestlers contact the 3XW page looking for bookings today, or, in recent times, and they don't have any match footage on YouTube, or they don't have any pictures to send us, or I'll get a message that says, "Yo, book me." No, dude, I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Maybe send me a resume at least. And, at this point in time, you should have video either on your phone or on YouTube where you can send me a link. So
Yeah, fan cam footage, anything.
right. Anything is better than nothing. And to be honest, someone's that if I've never heard of them, they've really got to impress me to even watch a video. So they better have a really good message coming my way, or they better be recommended by someone I already know, because the thing with promoting pro wrestling show is there are so many wrestlers that I already know of that I can sort of choose from to be on the show, that if you want to earn a spot, you've really got to make an impression. So people that don't promote themselves, it's baffling.
Yeah, yeah. It honestly really is. And that was, I started going to wrestling shows. It was about 10 years ago. I started going to wrestling shows, and I started seeing that like, oh, a lot of these guys have Twitter, so I follow them on Twitter, and then you see that like some of these guys aren't using Twitter very much, and I hated to just give away the endings of shows, but I would go on Twitter and I would post like, hey, this is what happened. This person defeated this person, and I would tag the promotion and hashtag the event, and do anything I could to draw any sort of attention to it. And it actually garnished.
I remember you doing that, and I love seeing those.
Yeah, it was weird. It garnished a lot of attention from a lot of people. I started getting retweets from your promotion. If I ventured to other promotions started taking notice and being like, "Oh, this is that guy that's always at wrestling shows." And that's initially what got the Indie Power Rankings kind of started. It was a couple of guys from Louisville, Kentucky. And they they hit me up and they were like, "Hey, we see that you're always at shows and you span like Minnesota to Missouri and Nebraska to Illinois, and you see everything. What do you want to get in on this?" And that was something I started doing, and a lot of the wrestlers started taking to it and retweeting the results and things. At Meaty Thoughts on Twitter, that was my handle. Still is. I don't use it very much, but it still is my handle. And a lot of those wrestlers still follow me. It was kind of crazy because I didn't really divulge the information to too many people, but like I started getting like occasional retweets for things from like the Vince McMahon account, and the Triple H account retweeted me a couple of times.
Oh yeah.
I had like just handfuls of wrestlers that either were training or had trained and were just kind of like looking at the indie scene. Like Scotty Riggs followed me for quite a while, and who was the guy that trained down at NXT that ended up kind of upsetting everyone not too long ago? Bill DeMott, does that sound right?
Oh yeah. Okay,
Yep,
yeah. He was
yep.
the head trainer.
Yep, Bill DeMott followed me for a while. I mean, it was weird, and I didn't know what to do with it. I wanted to make like a different account where I could expel all the wrestling stuff, but I didn't want to change the handle because everybody already knew me as that weirdo handle guy, And
Right.
I was one of those weird super fans. But that's something at every show, like you said. I think every show has one of those guys that goes out there and tries to publicize the events of the show. So, and other promoters do take notice, and people within the wrestling community do take notice because they will see those things. And I mean, I'm sure you're just as curious as I am when you see stuff like that on Twitter. You're like, who defeated this guy? And you click on some of the stuff, and you're like, oh, this guy. And so there's a picture here, and you start to kind of dig in a little bit because I'm sure you're just as curious as I am.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I always want to see kind of what's, currently going on or being booked other places. That's the nice thing about social media, I guess, is you can at least kind of stay in the loop of, what, and I like to see what my, people that I consider friends or people I've worked with are doing. So I try to follow along with anything that the Minnesota guys are doing or the Kansas City guys, and try to stay also current with kind of like what we were talking about earlier. What are the current styles or trends that are going on out there? What's kind of getting a crowd to come to a show? For a while there it was like the Joey Ryan thing seemed to be popular across the country. I mean, it still is, but
yeah,
just to see what the new, trend of the year or month is. So that's the cool thing.
To all that Joey Ryan stuff, I just got to say Casanova was ahead of his time.
He really was. If he had done that gimmick in 2019, 20, I think it would have been huge.
Yeah, man. One of the earliest pictures of me at a wrestling show that Peyton Mitchell actually took the picture, and it's me at ringside with a sign that says Casanova stole my girlfriend, and I'm like laughing the hardest I've ever laughed. There's like a picture of Casanova. He comes out and he sees it, and he's just like, what? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And just like keeps walking. Gives me the yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
But
yeah, he would put his hands behind his head and kind of
just
swivel his hips a little bit.
Yeah, just side to side. It was the perfect amount of cheese. It was
and
awesome.
Just to describe him to everybody that hasn't seen him, Casanova kind of usually would have some sort of mustache or beard and kind of longer dark hair, and
it's like Ron Burgundy meets John Belushi.
Yeah, not the six-pack guy, kind of a little bit thicker chest hair.
Yeah.
Showing off his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Those are some, I think back to those a lot. Those are some of the most fun times I had, was just going to those shows and seeing those guys. And, once a month you go see these guys and go see what they're up to and watch them kind of goof around in this, as their personas, and interact with different people, whether it be new fans, old fans, new opponent, whatever it was always fun to see that. And I don't know if I've ever actually said it to you, but dude, thank you so much for just giving me, all of those smiles for all the years and giving me so much to enjoy.
Oh, well, thank you. I remember when you and your group of friends started coming to all those shows and seeing your guys' face at every show. And then kind of as we started to travel around, I'd see you guys in Grinnell or Ottumwa, and I was always very happy to see you guys because, one, I knew that you must like what we do, and two, you guys were not shy about cheering or booing and would always try to keep the crowd into the show. So that's always very helpful, because when you have no reactions,
yes,
it just makes everything just seem dead. So
yeah, I mean, believe it or not, that was something when I started going to shows, I started realizing that, and this is such a touchy topic, but the crowd has a responsibility at the shows.
Yes.
I mean, some crowds tend to overstep their bounds, but some promotions invite that overstepping of the bounds. So it all depends
Right.
on where you're at and what's going on. It's kind of like, it's no different than going to a comedy show. Some of them you have to sit and be quiet and never say anything. Other ones, they invite you to heckle and stuff like that. You know, it's
100%.
kind of like that. But, you know, I started going to shows and it was just like, I don't want to be like, it's weird when nobody's cheering or booing anyone. You know, if everybody comes in,
Right.
if everybody comes in fresh and you're in Grinnell and there's a whole fresh crowd and it's just a handful of regulars, they don't know who to cheer for and who to boo for, you know, and it's like,
Right.
I know when to cheer. You know, it's so weird to say this, but you know, you'd start to see like, this is the spot where I need to be yelling at this guy for doing the stuff he's doing.
Right.
You know, and it not only helps everybody else in the crowd, but it helps the wrestlers, the referee, it helps everybody kind of get into the swing of things. And that was, I don't want to be like, I took this so seriously, that was my job, it's a show. No, but it was like, it was one of those things when I was at shows, I was like, yeah, this is something I'm going to do for sure because it's necessary to be done.
Right. And, you know, I think it adds to the enjoyment for everybody. Like, you know, not only for the crowd, but, you know, for the wrestlers themselves. When people are reacting, you know, whether it's booing or cheering, you know, it helps keep them going. I mean, like, it literally energizes them, and it makes for them to have more animated reactions and to do bigger, you know, versions of their moves because they're amped up.
Yeah.
So it just helps the entire atmosphere.
That's 100% correct. I mean, you can go to a show and have two people wrestle at it, and if nobody's into it, they'll give it their all, but they're only going to give it their all as much as the crowd is giving it their all. You know, if the crowd, it's no different than, you know, you watch WrestleMania versus a Monday Night Raw. It's you know, at Mania, everyone's going absolutely ballistic, and that's what's causing these wrestlers to go out and do the extra crazy stuff. You know,
Right.
and it's not saying that if you cheer harder, wrestlers are going to do crazier things. Maybe, you know, maybe not, but
Right.
you know, it's one of those things that shows. I never took too lightly to it because I realized how damaging it was to have, you know, absolutely no sound. It'd be like telling a joke in a comedy store and nobody laughing ever, you know?
Exactly.
Like,
Yep.
it just doesn't make sense, you know, and it doesn't do any favors to the comedian trying to make people laugh. But it's, you know, it also harkens back to, you were describing earlier that, you know, if you're trying to be a good guy and get people to cheer for you, that's not always easy either. So, you know, sometimes you throw them a little bit of a bone here, and then everyone else is like, yeah, this guy's not so bad. You know, they start cheering
Right.
him, and then, you know, you can kick back a little bit and let the rest of the crowd take it from there. But
Right.
we used to do cheesy stuff like bring signs for people and things like that because why the hell not, you know?
Exactly. Yep.
I don't know. I always just thought it was fun to get involved. I never wanted to get too involved and just be the guy that was stood up and screamed in people's faces and stuff like that. But, you know, like we were talking with bad guys, sometimes they walk by and it's just like, you'd give them a jab as they'd walk by. You'd say something like, "Oh, hey, you're something, your face," you know, and
Right.
they'd turn and look at you and you'd be like, "Oh yeah," and then you know you throw some fuel on the fire for the guy to really wind up and let you have one. And, you know, not physically, but verbally usually, you know, and those were some of the funnest times too, is being able to interact
Right.
with the people while they were doing what they were doing. I mean, it wasn't you don't always have the opportunity to do it, but given the opportunity, there's,
When you can. Yeah.
there's pictures of me online, you know, hem-hawing with Devin Carter as he's walking around the ringside, you know, skating out of the ring, trying not to, you know, take one on the chin from somebody, so he rolls out of the ring, and I'm just like, get back in there, and he's, you know, you shut up, you know. You know, speaking of fan bases, I do want to say, like, you know, your Halloween shows were always fun. I remember you had a fan that dressed up as he dressed up as Mini Devin Carter. That was probably the most
Yes.
fun. I remember you involved him in a match at one point in time.
Yeah, that kid was awesome. He went all out.
Yes.
You know, he did at one point in time. This one may have come first. I'm not 100% sure, but he did a mini Casanova also.
Yep. The Mini Casanova, I think, was the year
but
prior.
His Devin Carter was spot on, and then I think he kept wearing the Devin Carter to multiple shows.
Yep.
Where he had so Devin Carter's look at the time was basically a I guess you'd say knee length fur coat with the sleeves cut off, wrestling singlet, sunglasses, buzzed hair and beard. So this kid had the whole look down. And we had a show that I believe was in Grimes, Iowa, for whatever their local festival is. And we had Ted DiBiase there, and a pretty good, crowd there. And yeah, so Devin Carter and mini Devin Carter bantered back and forth, and he got involved a little bit in that. So, but that kid was awesome, and his dad was a very cool guy, and he was a Facebook friend of mine for years after they stopped attending. He actually the father passed away this past fall. So that's kind of one of the other things going through this journey, I guess, whatever, over the last 15 years is just, it's weird how you get to know these people, and just, I guess, like any other aspect of life, then some of them start to pass away, or get sick, and so it kind of sucks to see that happen, because I've seen several what I would consider fairly young people, either directly from wrestling or I knew them as fans, that have passed away now. So, but thank goodness for him bringing his son to those shows, because he livened up those matches with Devin Carter like to a crazy degree, and Devin Carter himself got a huge kick out of that every single time it happened. And Casanova and Devin Carter were tag team partners at the time, so that kid loved giving them a hard time. So, and also to Chad Milan, who was a manager on the shows at the time. Yeah, he would bring signs insulting Chad repeatedly.
Yes, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Chad Milan on this. Oh my gosh,
good old Chad, my true to life cousin, who was just like me, a wrestling fan from probably from the time he was born. I don't know, and I maybe I rubbed that off on him. I don't know. But when he was, because he's several years younger than me, so I would always make sure that when his birthday was coming up, we would get him wrestling action figures for his birthday, and further his passion. And then when I started this company, it was actually the year that he was graduating from high school. So he started helping us out with like ring crew / security. And as you can imagine, Chad being all of probably 130 pounds was a very menacing security guard. So very intimidating to anyone saw him standing to the side of the ring. But then it wasn't maybe the following year, him and Skylar started to host what we called Outside the Ring, which was our YouTube kind of talk show / feature promos and our little skits, vignettes. Mm-hmm. And he showed a side of himself that I had never seen before, where he had this like dish sort of heel personality on there. And so then eventually we just started throwing him out there as a manager, and he was great. I wish he still did it. He actually moved to Arizona as one of the reasons he's not doing it, and he didn't pick it up out there, but he was very good at it, and I think he would have gotten even better if he would have stuck with it. But he did it for several years for us and started the Milan Management Agency, MMA. Mm-hmm. So yep. He was very good with all of his different various talent that he had in that group. So I miss seeing him at shows, just backstage, but also watching him on shows because he was a maniac.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know how he kept his voice at shows, because, I mean, anybody said any little thing and he would yell from across the like, I mean, it'd just be insane. Just, hey, just screaming at people. It was so funny. Oh, and that's just the thing. I'm sure there's people that we're forgetting to mention that I've spent so much time. This isn't like a competition to mention everybody either,
Right,
but
for
like,
sure.
but you know, it's one of those things. There's so many people that I spent so much time around that, like you said, you build this community and you don't realize how many people you actually meet. I mean, on your level, earlier we were talking about wrestlers, and now we're talking
Hmm.
fan base. Even, you know, I mean,
For sure. And kind of like with Chad, like you don't really know what's inside of that person necessarily, even though you might know them really well. And there's a guy named Midnight Guthrie, is his wrestling persona, and he started coming to our shows. He was at the very first show. He was going to Iowa State at the time, and started to involve him as a backstage interviewer, and eventually he became a commentator and play-by-play guy. I thought was like perfect backstage interviewer, kind of like an old school, just really, straight face, kind of a goody two shoes interviewer, and the bad guys would give him a hard time. But then he came to me maybe a year and a half ago with this other idea he had about being a heel manager. And I was like, well, the way he made it sound to me, I thought it was phenomenal. It was the Captain Midnight. And
Yep.
so now I threw him out on the show like that. He had a little captain's hat, like looking like Captain and Tennille. He put on some like 1980s looking eyeglasses, and wearing a jumper, more or less.
Yeah.
And I was blown away. I told him that night, I'm like, this was meant to be. Like, I wish he would have done it a decade ago.
Yeah.
But he is awesome in that role, and I'm happy to see him doing that, not only on our shows, but like he is traveling a lot now. He's going to different states doing this, managing different guys, and he's got a good, core group that he travels with also that he manages in Iowa and other states. So, he's got a whole different aspect to what he can do now. He could jump right back into the other stuff, but this is really his calling, I think.
Yeah, like you said earlier, taking advantage of social media, he's done a pretty good job of that recently too. So, I mean, hats off to staying busy for doing that. But like you said earlier too, Midnight was a pretty reserved. Like you said, not like goody two shoes, but he was kind of like your goody two shoes, like on scene reporter. I'm here reporting with this guy. What do you have to say about that, sir?
Yeah.
And, he was one of those kind of guys. And now to see him go out there, I've actually seen him be Captain Midnight, a few times. And by the way, he's not wearing a jumper; he's wearing a romper, and you couldn't afford one that nice. He wanted
That's right.
he wanted me to tell you that. So, he's doing damn good at doing what he's doing now. And I don't, like you said, I don't know where it came from. I didn't even know he had it in him, and he's out there just crushing it. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you've seen guys transform like that over the last 15 years too. It's one of those crazy things.
Oh, for sure. And, some guys, sometimes they get stuck with a label and it sticks. Sometimes they're able to break away from it. And I remember early on, kind of, but a lot of people had why it was he can't cut a promo. They, and other promotions would never give him a microphone. And
Hang on a
I'll
second.
tell you, that guy, yeah.
You were you cut out there a little bit. We were talking.
Oh, did I cut out?
Yeah. So just
I was talking about so some guys get stuck with a label and they can't escape from it. There's a guy named Jeremy Wyatt, and he had the label of not being able to cut a promo or do an interview. So other promotions, they wouldn't give him a microphone, or they would put a manager with him to talk for him. And that guy might be one of the best promo guys that I've seen in independent wrestling. He is a ferocious heel when speaking on a microphone.
yes.
And I've also seen him be able to do it on the flip side, where he can talk like a good tough baby face, and also get the crowd behind him.
Yeah.
I mean,
he can
definitely prefer to see him as a heel, but man, he's a great talker.
Yeah, and that's wild. Like, while you're on the topic of him, I think he can do more on Twitter cutting a promo than most people can with a microphone nowadays. It's pretty wild, you know. And that's another one of those things. I remember seeing him wrestle, you know, when I first started going to shows, and he was one of the first guys that was like, God damn, this guy knows what's up, you know. And you know, you get to follow people around Twitter and see where else they go. And you know, he was one of the first guys I started just like kind of following him around, where it's like, where's he wrestling this week? I'm gonna go check that out, you know. And you
Yeah.
get to build that nice community of wrestling. It's wild, and it all started, you know, at your shows at 3XW. It's pretty crazy, you know. Clinton Kelsey had went to a few of your shows, and they were like, "Hey, you got to come with us to one of these shows." And you know, I got sucked in hard. It's good stuff, man. We were talking social media. This might be a good spot to plug some social media. You have any? I know you got the 3xwrestling.com. Is that still a website that's active?
It still is. You know, we don't update it necessarily as much as we used to. I used to, Mark McDowell, Mad Dog, he's the one that does all the website itself, and he knows a little programming and such. So I used to kind of write his ass to update the roster constantly and make sure everything was current. But kind of with the advent and popularity of social media, it makes it less necessary to have everything, you know, 100% perfect on the actual website itself. You know, we'll list the upcoming events, and some, I would say, more basic information on the website. And then the more detailed stuff we'll put on all of our other platforms, you know, and everywhere pretty much we're 3X Wrestling. So, you know, like Facebook.com/3X Wrestling, Twitter's at 3X Wrestling, Instagram is the same. And then the only one that's different is YouTube. We have 2 YouTube channels. One has a bunch of old stuff on it, and that's 3X Wrestling. And the one that has a vast majority of the content is 3X Wrestling.com, because they wouldn't let us put a dot in, I guess. So you can check us out in either. Hopefully one day we can merge those 2 channels, but they haven't let us yet.
Oh, that's a bummer. Yeah, I know I've battled that a few times.
Yeah.
I've tried to merge stuff over to the Audible Farm channel, and it's not happy.
Not
about it.
easy. You basically have to start over.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, how much stuff are you putting on YouTube these days? Is that where most of your content ends up?
You know, it's interesting. So and this is just me personally, really. It's kind of, you know, I've gone back and forth on, you know, putting stuff on there and not putting it on there. So there kind of has been a delay on certain times of adding content, mainly because of all the streaming options available for pro wrestling companies now. So in 2020, we're going to start adding all of our shows to independentwrestling.tv, which,
cool.
For those not familiar, it's a huge streaming service for independent wrestling companies. So basically, there's promotions from all over the world on there. So we're going to put both new and some older content on there, and hopefully people will check it out. So it'll be a way for people to check it out if they want to. It's subscription based. And I believe once it's up, it'll be the same deal, like /3X Wrestling would be where you would find us on there. But YouTube, you know, we kind of run into some unfortunate venue things, which is probably also a thing in music, where we were doing events at the Social Club. They closed. So we kind of had a little gap in Des Moines area shows due to them closing. Our last scheduled event there, we didn't actually get to due to the timing of when they closed. So our actual last show there was, I believe, like September of 2019. So then we've done a couple of things here and there at other venues. But upcoming here at the latter part of spring, we'll return to Des Moines. And we've got a show in March, actually, March 21st in Fort Dodge for the first time ever. So
where are you going to be at in Fort Dodge?
So there is a place called Fort Frenzy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So March 21st will be our first event in Fort Dodge, hopefully one of many.
That's awesome.
So I guess from what I understand, they've done some boxing and MMA there before in that venue.
Yep.
Of course, it's regularly totally different atmosphere there, but yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. So it'll be really the first actual event that we've had of the year. We did what I would call a kind of a mini show. It was just 4 matches at Pro Wrestling Night with the Iowa Wolves basketball team at Wells Fargo Arena this past Saturday.
Yeah, I was gonna make sure to mention that, man. That looked super cool, dude. That looked
it was
so
very
fun.
cool. Yeah, Kurt Angle was their special guest for the night. So he talked to the crowd beforehand, introduced the players, and then for the main event of the 4 matches we did, which took place during halftime of the game, Kurt Angle got in the ring and did the ring announcements for the 3XW heavyweight title match. So that was just, for me personally, very cool to see a guy of his caliber, get in there, and just to hear him 3XW heavyweight championship was pretty cool. So
yeah, man.
But very nice guy. So I was glad that was the second time that I had been able to be around him, thankfully, and I recommend anyone go meet him if he's in your area. He's a super cool guy, and he was very friendly with all of the wrestlers and all the fans. So, but that night, that atmosphere, just there's over 5,000 people in attendance, which I believe is one of their larger attendance of the year for the basketball games. So very, very cool for all of the wrestlers, especially the guys that are from Des Moines locally, to get to perform in, kind of their home arena. Was I know, very cool thing, for at least for a couple guys that talked to me about it. So, but I hopefully that happens again in the future. That was our 3rd time being able to do that with the local basketball team. So very, very good team that has won some championships in their leagues before. So hopefully they continue their success also.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are still doing real awesome things there. Even though I don't get to as many shows as I used to, this will harken me back to coming to another show. It's just one of those things. When I was in my 20s, I didn't have as much stuff on my plate. Now I've got so much on my plate, it's a little bit more difficult,
I know the feeling.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're balancing. You were saying when you started all this, you didn't even have a family or anything, and now you got family and kids, and
right.
That's got to be quite the chore.
Whole different atmosphere. Definitely, you have to balance your time a lot differently, and that's probably also when people notice a dip in social media presence, or maybe stuff getting filmed. It's I've got stuff going on, and Mark McDowell, he's got kids now also, so
yep.
It's trying to balance home life with work life / kind of, it's really a second job sort of thing. So trying to balance all that together and get everything out there in a timely fashion. Sometimes it's difficult, but it sounds like things will amp up here as the year goes on for us, and which is good. I was okay with taking a couple months, kind of taking a little slower with the social club closing, and we were able to kind of enjoy the holidays and not have to worry about a show around Christmas or anything. So that was a different kind of a winter for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you need that little bit of refresher too. It helps you come back even stronger when you start doing the regular shows. I mean, wintertime wrestling shows are a little bit slower anyways, typically due to weather and things like that. It does
make it a little more difficult, especially like we talked about earlier, people traveling. When you've got blizzards or snowstorms and in different states, may not even be here, but they're traveling from there, makes it a little harder.
Yep.
And sometimes, day of, you have to totally rearrange, the matches or ideas that you had, because maybe 2 or 3 people can't make it because of weather, or, something happens. So, it's always kind of a improvisation, I guess you could say. And sometimes that makes it a little more fun.
Yeah, man. I I was just thinking, think of all the thousands and thousands of people that have come to see your shows over the last 15 years, how many smiles you've put on all these faces by just promoting wrestling and doing what you love. I guess I'm just imagining a childhood you looking at the adult you and just being like, what? I get to do all of this?
That's crazy.
That's gotta feel cool.
It is very cool. And yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I could have never imagined that I would be involved in wrestling at all, coming from a small town of, 800 people and, really not even knowing what was out there beyond what I saw on TV. And I guess I probably also grew up in the best era of wrestling. I'm sure everybody thinks that, but growing up in the 80s and early 90s, seeing the NWA, WCW, AWA, World Class, all that stuff was still in existence when I was a kid, and it was all on TV. So like I got to see all these guys and as they jumped around and had all their action figures and stuff. And so yeah, that kid would be blown away by what I've been able to do. It kind of blows my mind too, is there's a few wrestlers wrestling for us now that when they were kids came to our show. So
oh my gosh,
to see them have actually gone through elementary up through high school and then trained, and they're grown people now and wrestle on our shows. The guy that is our champion now, Xander Killen, when he was much younger, he would attend our shows. So it's mind blowing.
You're a million years old, man.
That is exactly how it makes me feel.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, you run into that on shows too. You play in guitar and you go to a show and there's some 16-year-old kid just ripping it up, and it's like, God damn, this kid's good. He's half my age. I started playing guitar before he was born, and nah, whatever. It's wild, dude. It's a trip. You've been doing this for a long time, and it's crazy to think that even I haven't even sat down and talked with you, face to face. This is the closest we've gotten to talking to one another in probably 3-4 years.
Right.
I'd go to shows. I don't always have an opportunity to talk to you at shows because obviously you're busy. Like you're either you're in the show or you're backstage or you're doing
running around with the old chicken with its head cut off, just doing 1,000 things at once.
Yeah. I mean, and this is good to actually finally get to sit down and talk with you about some of this stuff. Actually get to cure some of that itch that I had, all these questions I wanted to ask you over the years, and kind of delve a little deeper into all these things that you actually do, because you're not just the manager there, and it's not like somebody's like, oh, this guy's the owner of 3X Wrestling. You really are the owner of 3X Wrestling. So there's a lot of stuff. You got your finger in a lot of pies, or whatever the analogy you want to use. But it's crazy, man. I said it before, I'll say it again. Thanks for doing everything that you do to entertain as many people as you do. I mean, if anybody's listening to this and you have literally any interest in pro wrestling, even in the slightest bit, did you grow up in the Hulk Hogan era, Attitude era? I don't care. Trust me, check out a local show. Go to 3XW down in Des Moines. Make an afternoon and an evening out of it. It's totally worth it.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think it's one of those things that and I've heard this from coworkers to people I grew up with, or random people that I've never met before. When they've checked out our show, I mean, across the board, they always enjoy it. So, whether gives you a laugh, or you're impressed by the athletic ability, or you just get into the characters, whatever it is, I think there's something for everybody. And just give it an opportunity, open your mind to it, and you'll have a good time. I think, everyone that I know that has seen it for the first time, they walked away being impressed, or at least they lied to me and told me they were. So, I think it's one of those things that, if you check it out, you'll like it. It's live entertainment. So, unless it's just our worst night ever, I think you'll walk away enjoying it. So,
dude,
if you see us around, come to check us out. Or if you're in another area and you see some other company, go check them out. Give it a chance. what's the worst that happens? You don't like it, never come back. So it's one of those things that live entertainment, I think, is sorely needed. You can't sit at home and stream Netflix or just support Disney as they buy up all the movie companies.
Yeah.
You've got to support your local music, the pro wrestling, local theater. I've got a lot of friends involved in all three of those things. So, get out and check out a live show, whatever it may be. Comedy too. Those guys, bust their ass trying to come up with new material. Got a few comedian friends, and one of them used to be our ring announcer. So,
yeah, you talking Daryl?
Daryl Moon.
Daryl Moon. That was another one. I didn't realize how freaking funny that guy was until you started looking at some of his stuff online. Like, God dang, this guy's hilarious, And
yeah, he is great. It's funny as the odd ways that people can get involved in wrestling. I actually work with his brother, and his brother brought Daryl to a show. So then Daryl and I got to talking, and that's how he ended up as our ring announcer. So
that's wild.
Yeah.
That's super fun, man. Oh gosh. Well, I think we covered quite a few of the things you were talking. Checking out local pro wrestling shows if another company comes to your town. I just want to say along the lines of that, if you've been to one company and you didn't like it, go try another company.
That's true. It's all different. People do things differently. They have different ideas. They have different wrestlers. And I won't lie to you, there are some terrible wrestling companies out there that no one should go to. But
I'm not calling
plenty
anyone
of good ones.
Yeah, I'm not calling anyone out, but I've been to those. I've been to enough wrestling shows to understand that. It's not a mean thing to say. It's an honest thing to say.
It's just like anything else. There are
Bingo.
Terrible musicians. There are terrible comedians. There's terrible theater, terrible movies.
Oh God, yeah.
So but there are a lot of good ones, and in the Midwest right now, there are a lot of good wrestling companies.
Yes.
And a lot of good wrestlers. And once you find at least a good wrestler, you can kind of follow where they're working. And if they're a good wrestler, more than likely they're only working for good places.
Yeah. That's how I started branching out into other companies. Was I wanted to see wrestlers wrestle more than once a month, and it was like, I'm going to go see where this guy's wrestling this month, and you get to see 5, 6, 7 other guys that you never saw before, and maybe you like one of them. It's a fun thing. If you like pro wrestling, I highly suggest going to check out a local show. There's nothing better than live entertainment. There's nothing better than being 10 feet away from somebody getting body slammed, and it's like, oh, dude, this is actually real. It's happening right in front of me. That's such a cool thing. You got anything else you want to add? We did all the plugging for the social media. It's at 3X Wrestling on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. YouTube, you've got 3X Wrestling Com.
Yes, sir.
Yes. All right.
I think that's all my plugs. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And, just so all of your listeners know, you are the most flexible man in the world. I literally rescheduled this, I think, 172 times because I am a madman, mostly dealing with small people in my house and different schedules, and I have a terrible memory. So then when I had an event, I had to switch it to another day. And so you are the nicest guy in the world, and I much appreciate you even wanting to talk to me and this platform. So
dude, don't worry about it, man. I spent enough time enjoying what you do, and I just had to bug you about it a little bit, and what you and all of the wrestling community, all the wrestlers, like every drop of that is art. It's all art. You guys are doing insanely crazy things with your, like, the imagination to come up with storylines, to the actual wrestling itself, to the ability to interact with the crowd and things like that. It's super wild. That's just one of those things. It's baffled me and it's wowed me more often than not. And I'm more than happy to talk to you and anybody else. If there's any other wrestlers listening to this, if I saw you wrestle and you want to sit down and talk with me about some wrestling stuff sometime, I would love to dust off the old wrestling catalog and talk to you about what, how you got to doing what you're doing. I really appreciate, you sitting down talking with me, because this is, primarily an entertainment, music, art podcast, but you're you're live entertainment just like everybody else. And I think what I found out by going to so many of your shows was how important live entertainment is in any facet.
For sure. And I think you see it to a different degree too when you go to smaller towns, because they don't have access to maybe even a movie theater. So just to provide some form of entertainment for those folks to get out of their house and not have to drive an hour, to the quote unquote city, is something cool that you can provide to those communities. So you get a different appreciation too, I think, when you go to some of those local communities. But I appreciate you having me on here and even trying to boost our signal a bit, just like you did on Twitter. You did a lot to help independent wrestlers and different promotions, by attending their shows and putting out the results, and also promoting those rankings, weekly rankings of the different wrestlers. So don't sell yourself short either. You did a lot to help the community itself. So thank you for doing that, and also attending the shows, for so many shows. It was phenomenal to have you. And anytime that you want me to come back on the show, I'd be more than happy to. And if you ever want any of the guys, I can tell them to get their butts on here and speak to the man.
Heck yeah, dude. That sounds awesome. Todd, it's been a great time sitting down chatting with you. I've been all smiles the whole time, man. It's been great. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's been fun. We'll have to do it again sometime for sure.
Yep. Don't go away. I'm going to talk to you after the podcast is over here, but don't go away. Oh, yeah. Another episode come and gone. Big thanks to Todd Countryman. Not only for joining me on the podcast, but for giving me something to do through the majority of my 20s. I had so much fun at every 3X Wrestling show, all the fair shows they did, all the traveling shows, the shows at Des Moines, at the various locations they've promoted. Man, I really appreciate it. All the, cool people I got to meet, all the famous people, wrestlers that used to be on TV, everything. It was tons of fun. I made a lot of good friends, a lot of permanent acquaintances that I still keep in touch with to this day. A lot of people that are doing a lot of fun things. And, just hats off to everybody in the wrestling community. You guys were a giant part of, my 20s in my life. So I really wanted to harken back a little bit to that and just say thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. And, hey, everybody, go to a pro wrestling show. If you like pro wrestling even a little bit, I highly suggest it. The easiest way to find a wrestling show would be to check out your local fair. County fairs are a hot spot for these independent promotions to come to town and show you guys what pro wrestling's all about. That's where I went and saw my very first independent show ever, and it was a while before I actually finally went to a 3X show, but it was one of those things where it's like, I remember liking this on the independent level. Let's go out on my own and drive to another town and check it out. And I did, and I loved it. I fell in love. It was tons of fun. I really enjoyed it. So thanks, Todd, for joining me. I really appreciate it. Everybody, check out a local wrestling promotion near you. If you're interested in 3X Wrestling, I got links down below. Check them out. I want to say thanks once again to Todd. Thanks to everybody at 3X Wrestling for all the memories throughout the years. Everybody I watched wrestle, in and out of the company. People that just wrestled there a couple times. I don't know. If you're listening to this and you're a wrestler, I probably saw you wrestle. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, guys. I want to say thanks to Couchtown Coffee sponsoring us week in and week out. You guys can go to www.couchtowncoffee.com, find a coffee you like, and save 20% this week by entering the code 3XW. That's 3XW. Make an order at couchtowncoffee.com. Use that code word 3XW. It'll let them know that Audible Farms sent you there. Oh man, saving 20% never sounded so good. Appreciate it. Thanks, Couchtown. Thank you guys for listening to this week in and week out. It's getting more popular. It's crazy. I'm starting to look at the stats, and it's wild. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. It seems about every week I have somebody reach out to me and say, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. It's really cool. I like this episode. I like that episode. I just found your podcast. I'm going back a handful of episodes to listen to some older ones. I really appreciate it. So if you guys found an episode that you liked and you want to go back and check out some old episodes, please do. Let me know what you think of them. Let me know what what you think of the podcast. I really appreciate it. Go to www.audiblefarm.com to find all things Audible Farm, links to everywhere, contact information, even some links to other podcasts and cool things. So check it out, www.audiblefarm.com. Thanks once again to Todd Countryman, this week's guest, 3X Wrestling promoter and owner. I will check you guys next week. Peace.